All right. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we will jump right in. I mentioned this last time, but if you have a notebook or your digital equivalent, pull that up because we're going to be using that today. And I will share my screen. All right, so we are on review session 2. There's going to be a lot of slides like last time, but I have a promise this time to not spend more than, let's say, 30 seconds or so on any given slide and focus mostly on the exercises. So this week we're on distribution and SEO. All right, just as a reminder, you can always go to bit.ly or bit.ly/DCR-resources to get all of the resources from not just these sessions, but previous sessions we've done. And then if you want to download the exercises, you can go to your Gumroad library, and it should be the 7th file there called exercise PDF, and there's an EPUB as well. We're going to be going through a lot of the exercises from those files or from that file. So just if you want to pull it up in the future. So as I said, we're talking about distribution and SEO. If you take anything away from this talk, it is that what most people do, maybe you could say wrong or incorrectly, or how they could be more effective, is that they spend so much time creating, which is amazing, but they don't spend very much time actually working to get their creations in front of people. I'd like to say that your favorite singer, your favorite actress, your favorite X, Y, or Z is actually not the best actress out there. They're likely incredible marketers of their craft. If you think of someone like Kanye West, obviously he's a great artist, but he's also an incredible marketer of his creations. And so it doesn't matter how good your content is, if you don't invest in getting it in front of people, no one will see it. This sounds obvious, but let's just take a pulse of people who are here on this call with us. If you want to pull up the chat and just share, what ratio do you think of your content production to distribution do you think you do? So let's say if you spend just as much time doing content production versus distribution, put 1 to 1. If you spend 3 times as much time creating your content versus distributing it, put 3 to 1. I'd love to see some examples in the chat of people reflecting on just roughly, I know it's kind of hard to tell sometimes, how much time you spend on the production versus the distribution. Distribution meaning getting people aware of your content. I see Jake shared 95 to 5. That's not abnormal. I'd say that's actually somewhere in the kind of like 90% range is what I see a lot of people do, spending most being like a large share of their time creating the content. Zealinda saying 2 to 1. Let's see if any other responses come in. If you want to just jot this down on your own as well, I see Laura actually saying 0.25 to 1, which means she's spending most of her time or the lion's share of her time distributing stuff, which can be great. Jesper is saying 5 to 1. John is saying 1 to 1. So you can see it varies greatly. And of course, it also varies depending on the content medium that you're using. But I would say that in general, just kind of like a rule of thumb to get you in the rough range of what I've seen really work well is that it should be pretty equal, meaning that if you spend way too much time creating your content and not actually getting it in front of people, well, as I mentioned, no one will see it. However, if you go the complete opposite direction, I like to say that you can't polish a turd, which means that if you spend no time creating wonderful content, we talked in the first couple sessions about the importance of amazing content, well, then you can distribute it all you want, but no one's going to care about it, right? So there does have to be a balance, and there's no perfect ratio there. But what I will say is if you find yourself on either end of that spectrum, too far in one direction, then you're probably going to want to balance that out. So instead of spending what I see most people do, 90% and 10 or something in that range, make it more like 50-50. And that's what I've seen work with my content as well. So keep that in mind. Just to share a couple more kind of snippets or frameworks to think about, your efforts compound on each channel. And we're going to talk about channels in a second. But if you start with trying to tackle 5 different channels at once, well, you never really get to this really important chasm, as some people say. You don't cross that chasm to where you really get exponential returns. So if you find yourself saying, I don't have enough time to distribute across 8 of these channels, well, yeah, I'm not surprised. Focus on one until you hit that critical mass. And then what you'll see is it tends to give you a halo to other channels. And then finally, in terms of, again, these just like overview things to consider when it comes to distribution is that at the beginning, you may focus on one channel, but in order to figure out which channel to focus on, you will want to explore and exploit, which this is like a concept from computer science, but basically you don't know what's going to work, right? And so you will want to, at the beginning, not focus on 20 channels at once, select a few, test them, and as you start to see positive indicators on certain channels, get rid of the other ones. Don't just continue on channels because you started on them, and then slowly weed out what really works for you. It sounds vague, but it's really, really important as you start your content journey, because I've seen people focus on one channel forever, and I'm like, your audience isn't even there. So this also brings us back to the first chapter, where it's like you must, or you're better off selecting your channels based on where your audience is. Okay, when it comes to distribution, there's this codes framework, which is 5 different things that you should keep in mind. And I'm going to talk about which one or ones I think are most important, but it's cost, ownership, dependability, effort, and scalability. So these are all factors that every channel has a different flavor of. So some channels are high cost, some channels are high effort, some channels are super, super scalable, some channels are not scalable at all. And you can see that I've basically broken down 6 different types of traffic. There's bedrock, viral, social, syndicate, targeted, and paid. I'm not going to go into each of these in depth because, again, I want to focus on the exercises, but I'm going to flip back to the slides so you can see them. I'm curious to know, for people on this call, what type of channel do you find yourself gravitating, can't talk this morning, towards? So is it bedrock, viral, social, syndicate, targeted, and paid? And if you're not sure what these are, bedrock are really the channels where your investment today reaps returns not just tomorrow, but therefore. So those are things like Quora, those are things like SEO, where you're making an investment in the bedrock. The slates kind of pile on top of each other. Syndicate would be something like where you're taking your content and you're repurposing it on another channel like Medium, right? So you publish it on your own blog and then you're republishing it on Medium. Targeted would be things like communities. People are just in, these communities to talk about specific topics. And I have a feeling you guys know what social and paid are. Viral would be something like Hacker News. So far in the chat, MC says bedrock. She prefers search engines. Linda says social and bedrock. John is saying syndicate and bedrock. I see Ivy saying social and targeted. What I love here is that I'm seeing several people say bedrock, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot today because we're talking about SEO in the second half of this. But really what I tend to see, especially for people starting out, they really focus on viral channels and social channels. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but you'll notice that social does have a little bit of a bedrock element. You can see it kind of trending up and to the right, but viral especially, I hear all the time, and I felt the same way, people who said, I want to trend on Hacker News, like that's a goal of mine. And once you do it, it feels great, but it's that dopamine hit that disappears, because basically once you do that, that traffic doesn't really come back. Something like bedrock is, if we're talking about this code framework, it takes a lot more effort, but it's a lot more dependable. And so when we think about the different parts of codes that we really want to care about, depends on the person, depends how much money you have, how much time you have. But what I think is really, really important are things like whether it's dependable and whether it's scalable, right? So we actually don't want to discount things that are high effort if it means that they pay off in other ways. All right, so we already went through this question, and these are just, as I mentioned, a bunch of examples across these. What you're going to see a lot through this presentation are slides with a lot of information on them. And as I said, I'm going to zoom past them because you can always revisit the slides, or you can always listen to the old version of these live sessions, because a lot more depth is gone into there, but you can kind of see the many different examples of channels that you can play with. And I think this is important because a lot of people think that there's like 2 channels, right? A lot of people are like, oh, I use Twitter and then I like have my newsletter. And there are so many more channels that you can play around with than that. So just keep that in mind. So this is an iteration of the previous question, but I would love to know for people, the last question, what you gravitated towards? This question is, what channels have actually brought you the most growth? And then in this case, I'd love to hear not just about the channel type, but specific channels. So instead of social, you might say Twitter. Instead of syndication, you might say Medium. Bedrock, you might say Google. So I'd love to hear from people where you've seen the most growth. So Ivy mentioned LinkedIn. Bhavani said Twitter and SEO. John is saying newsletter. Linda shared Facebook. So yeah, a huge mixed bag so far. And whenever I ask this question, it does tend to be a mixed bag. Jake is saying YouTube. YouTube's an awesome one because YouTube, I have it in syndication here, but really it should also be in Bedrock. Any search engine has Bedrock to it. That's why Quora effectively is also a search engine. And sorry for the train, but yes, every search engine has this Bedrock element to it because, again, if you learn to rank for certain terms, people are going to continue coming back to you through those terms and not just through your publishing schedule. I'm seeing Andy say LinkedIn mainly. So it looks like a mixed bag, but a lot of social. And that doesn't surprise me because when I tend to ask this question, I get a lot of people who say that a lot of their growth comes from social. Again, not wrong. It's, I think, a great channel to use. A lot of my growth has come from Twitter. But moving on, I want to go through the next exercise, which gets you thinking about what other channels may be available to you. So what I want you to do, and I can go back to the other slide if you guys want to see some of the examples of channels. But in this exercise, what I want you to do is, again, on a piece of paper, or it can just be bullet points on your Evernote or whatever you use, to write down a couple different, I have distribution vectors here, but it's just channels, right? Different types of channels that you may either use today or that you're thinking of using in the future. And I want you to write down basically the codes framework for it. So you can see an example here for SEO, which is for cost. It depends. If you're buying a bunch of links and you're trying to grow SEO quickly, it can be high cost, but generally it's low cost. Ownership, pretty good ownership in the sense that you own your content, but Google can obviously mess with your rankings at any time. So you don't own that direct distribution. Something like a newsletter would be a high ownership, right? You own not only that list, but your relationship with it, and you can't be offset by some algorithm. Dependability, how regularly can you depend on the traffic that you're getting from that channel? Is it these big spikes or is it consistent pretty much every single day? SEO tends to be high dependability. Effort, SEO tends to be probably one of the most high effort channels, as I mentioned before. And scalability, we'll talk about this in the SEO section, but it's incredibly scalable. And so what I want you to do here with these exercises is, again, we're only going to have a couple minutes to go through this. So a couple different channels here, again, that you either use or that you want to consider using, and write them down. And then at the end, we'll kind of take a look at them and be like, oh, am I only focusing, for example, on really, really low effort channels that don't really have much dependability or scalability, or vice versa. So I'm going to be quiet for, again, 3 to 4 minutes. And then I'll be back and we can discuss this / move on to the next couple exercises. All right. Ivy just quickly asked what scalability means. And in this case, yes, it means like something like a community would be not very scalable because, I mean, your max potential for that community is the number of people in that community, right? Which in many cases is hundreds of people, let's say. Something like Google is incredibly scalable. We'll talk about it in future slides, but there are trillions of searches every year. And the number of people you can reach is in the billions, right? Of course, you're not going to reach all of those billions, but you can reach a lot of people. So yeah, scalability is just the potential mass. You could say it's almost like your content TAM for the number of people that you can reach. So yeah, we've got around 2.5 more minutes, and I'll let you guys go through this. And Laura, I'll answer your question right when we come back. I just want to give people a chance to focus without me interrupting. All right, that was around 4 minutes. So I wonder, I do have a follow-up slide. Here we go. Just to share some examples of different types of channels and how I rated them. But to answer your question, Laura asked, how about using influencers/entities to promote your product? So we can kind of go through this quickly. So those influencers, working with them tends to be pretty high cost. Ownership tends to be pretty low because you don't actually really own that relationship. You also, most of the time, don't have a great understanding of how a particular sponsorship will do. So I would say it's also low dependability, in the sense that dependability really means that when I wake up tomorrow, do I know likely what I will get in terms of traffic from this channel? And most channels, the answer is no, right? If you have a high social following, it can be maybe, right? That's why I said social tends to have some element of bedrock. But if you have a YouTube channel, if you have a core account, if you have a bunch of articles ranking on Google, well, you know roughly how much traffic you're going to get. So it's highly dependable. And I would say it's also long-term in terms of its returns, right? So if you run an influencer placement, yes, you get a spike in traffic from that influencer placement, but unless it happens to be a YouTube video that tends to get traction later, well, you probably will get that spike and then it'll disappear. So it's not very dependable. Effort is low in a good way, so it'd be green, in that it's really easy because most of it you can offset that effort by having the influencer run the placement. And then scalability, I'd say this is medium in the sense that, yeah, if you want to spend a lot of money, you can reach a lot of people through an influencer. So that's kind of how I'd rate that one. But the point here is not that any channel is correct. It's just to see, for example, if you are investing, this is what I see a lot from creators, they're often investing in all of the same types of channels, right? So often it's very low effort, low cost, right? But then also not very dependable, not very scalable channels. And then they wonder why 6 months or a year in, they're still running on the same treadmill and saying, like, why don't I have any sort of dependability, or why hasn't my traffic grown substantially? And that's the reason, right? Because they're running on that treadmill, going for things that are these kind of flashes in a pan. And so this is an effort, this is an exercise for you to just evaluate that for yourself, right? To see if you're seeing all of the same types of channels and whether you can bake in a couple new ones. And the reason these two are highlighted up at the top is because these two types of channels, and there's more, but I'd say SEO and a referral program are two that I think are just universal in that everyone should have. And a referral program mostly relates to if you have a newsletter, so maybe less applicable if you're running a YouTube channel or a podcast, but in general, I would say these tend to be very good because, again, they tackle the two that I called out before, dependability and scalability, in that they're medium to high in both, right? And ownership, I guess, as well. So high dependability, you know what you're going to get. If you run a great referral program and you get that running, you also know how many referrals you roughly get every single day. And then scalability, they're both highly scalable. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, moving on, we're going to go through the distribution section pretty quickly because most of this I want to talk about SEO. So one of the channels that you can leverage is your newsletter as you go and try to build your following. Now, this is just going to be a quick exercise to get you to think through your modal copy. So the first thing is, where does your modal live? These are several different examples of where on my own site, you can see a modal, right? So one is event triggered. So when someone gets the page, and they're bouncing or they spend a certain amount of time on the page, that's event triggered. You can have a landing page that people direct to. So if someone says, if at the end of your email, you say, hey, if someone forwarded this to you, go sign up here. You can have a landing page that's really highly optimized for conversion. A fixed floating bar, if you want, it's hard to see, but there's one here at the top of my page. Within articles, you can embed it. So these are obviously forms where you're trying to get someone to sign up for your newsletter. And then the bottom corner of my site, I have that also fixed. The idea here is that you aren't going to get anyone to convert if you never ask. And yes, there is a balance between being too pushy, but also you need to ask in order for people to want to do something. That's also, by the way, why you see a lot more these days. People will write a Twitter thread. And if you follow me, you probably know that I'm not a huge fan of Twitter threads, but why people write Twitter threads, and at the end of that Twitter thread, they've now started saying, hey, if you like this thread, subscribe to, or follow me on Twitter, or subscribe to my newsletter, or listen to my podcast. Because again, if you don't ask, you will never receive. So that's why you see this a lot. And you can use the same mentality for whatever you're doing. That's also why at the end of a podcast, they always say, if you like this episode, subscribe or leave a review. You can add incentives there as well. The same way you have a lead magnet for a blog, you can add incentives, at the end of your podcast. If you review us, well, choose one winner who gets $1,000, or some podcasts have, people write in questions and then they read out their questions and shout that person out. So anyway, the idea here is make sure that you're asking people to take the actions that you want. And so for the people who do have some sort of website or modal copy, or sorry, some sort of website or newsletter where there would be a modal, curious if you want to dig it up, and this might take a second, curious to know what your modal copy is. I clearly couldn't write this morning, but yeah, what is your modal copy today? So if you want to dig that up, I'll give everyone a second to do that. And in the meantime, as you're digging that up, I wanted to actually, yeah, I'm going to pause and see if anyone has any of their modal copy, or you could also say your calls to action on your site. And just as I'm waiting, John, to answer your question, my newsletter actually hasn't been sent for a very long time, but my platform that I was using before was MailChimp. And I was using they have specific code that you can just basically grab from MailChimp and embed it in your site, both for the pop-up modal and then also for if I just go back, also for the within the article modal and then the landing page as well. These are all from MailChimp. The fixed I get from Ghost because my blog actually lives on Ghost. And then on the bottom corner is actually from, what was it called? There's something, it was something like Maker site. I'm forgetting what it's actually called. I can pull it up in a second, but it's a separate tool where basically you can embed something that's almost like an intercom for your own projects. Anyway, so it sounds like people weren't able to dig up their copy. That's okay. I'll give you guys the quick download of what you should pay attention to. And I actually see at least one being shared in the chat. But basically, a couple things to quickly go over to remember. You need some sort of value alignment. You'll notice here in these three, there's probably other things that you're going to notice that they do well, but the things that I really want to call out are the CTAs here. So the most common thing I see wrong with modals or any sort of CTAs is they say something like subscribe, or something that basically people don't want to do, right? Get my newsletter. People don't want to get your newsletter. People don't want to sign up for a demo. I saw that the other day where it was like, sign up for or register for a demo. No one wants to register for a demo. What they do want to do is they want to get smarter. They want to get amazing case studies. They want access to experts. In this case, they want free charts, right? So make sure that whatever you're asking for, because again, that's what you're doing. You're asking someone for something at the end, whether it's at the end of a Twitter thread or on your blog, ask them for what they truly want or what you're providing, right? The other things, social proof is obviously very common. There's many ways to do it. Harry Dry, I think, was the first person to add testimonials within his modal, which I think was amazing. I think once I asked Harry and he said that his bounce modal converted at 7%, which is one of the highest I've ever heard of. You can also add logos. You can obviously say join X number of Y people. You can see that's done here and in many other examples. And then the final thing, it's probably a little hard to see, but calming concerns is also equally important. So everyone knows that we're in this era of mass media and they are overwhelmed with the number of things they subscribe to. So if you're going to ask them to subscribe to something, make sure that you're calming their concerns. So a couple examples here. And again, I know it's hard to read. People are saying, I will never share your email or spam you with nonsense because I'm not a dick. I love that one. Some of them say it takes less than 5 minutes to read. So that's also calming a concern of someone who's like, oh, well, I want this in my inbox. So with that said, I wanted to do a super quick exercise. And again, I will read out since some of you did share your modal copy, I'll read that out in a second. But as a super quick exercise, this is my current modal. It's certainly not perfect, but I'd love to know basically the things that you think I'm doing right here. So if you can call out, if I just go back to the previous slide where there's value alignment or social proof or calming of concerns, or there's also things that even just me looking at this right now, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't do that. So take a look at this modal for just a minute or so and post in the chat where you think I'm doing things right, versus also feel free to share the things that you think I'm doing wrong based on the advice so far. Okay, so I'm seeing Jesper share number as social proof is good. MC saying, yes, the numbers sort of calm concerns. David is saying stay updated. The value aligns with my desire to keep up with stuff. Yes, I would say that stay updated. I'm like, that was one of the things where when I looked at it again, I'm like, it kind of aligns with this idea of value alignment. But I would also say it is like marketing type copy that maybe people would not have the best reaction to. And I think it could be more specific. Like, what do people actually get with this? Yes, there's also calming concerns. I would say one thing that I did here is the no spam ever. That is an attempt to calm concerns. I'm never going to spam you. I also like that someone called out, this was a new addition to the modal recently, providing an alternative with the podcast. So if people, for example, they just have too many things in their inbox, what I've done here is basically say, look, I get it. I understand because I'm just like that. And if you want to connect with me in another way, you can listen to the podcast instead. MC's asking, is stay updated enough of value prop? That's what I was mentioning before. I think, you know, if I were to be giving someone else advice, I'd say it's okay. It's not amazing. I think there's better CTAs. Just going back to the previous slide, get smarter, get new case studies. I'll try free charts. I think those are more specific and less marketing sounding. Now, of course, with everything that I'm saying here, you'll want to test it. And most platforms that are modal specific, so MailChimp doesn't really let you do this, but if you use a platform like Opt-in Monster, which I'm actually planning to migrate to at some point, that will allow you to A/B test these things. And that's actually really the best solution, right? So we're pontificating on what we think is true here. The best way to do things is test them and get that data. I agree with you also, Chinat, they're saying that the stay updated can be a different button color. It almost certainly should be, right? If you've worked in marketing, your CTA should be bright and very, very, it should be the one thing that draws your eye in. Exclamation point too much. Yeah, that's probably true as well. So yes, make sure to test everything, but I would like not right this minute. But actually I think that is the next modal. Sorry, I'm losing my mind. I thought there was another slide next, but what I want you to do is basically go through the same exercise, and I'll leave you 2 to 3 minutes for this as well with your own modal. Or if you don't have a modal, I would say, you know, if you have, for example, a segment at the bottom of your email, or if you have any sort of marketing copy on your site, to go through and see if there are any updates to make in terms of whether there's clear value alignment, a clear CTA without those super generic statements, if there's any social proof, if there's any, you know, concerns that need to be calmed. Removing distractions, that's actually one of the things I didn't mention so far, but speaks to that, having that loud and clear CTA in a specific color. So there should be one single action that you should take. I know the podcast thing kind of detracts from that, but I'd like you to take 2 to 3 minutes, and I'll go on mute to just do this exercise on your own with your own copy. So I'll be right back. All right, that was around 3 minutes. What I'd love to hear, if people are willing to share, if they made any changes, what were those changes to your modal copy? And just as people are sharing that, wanted to share some of the modals before the fact. So MC shared hers, which was navigate your IT and cyber threats on a budget. For risk-aware businesses and non-technical remote freelancers, sign up for simple guides available on demand and optionally delivered to your inbox. So just even reading that and also reading some of the others that are to come, I would say that some of these are quite long. So another thing that wasn't included in the feedback so far is that you want it to be super clear, right? Where someone knows exactly what they're getting, and the easiest way to get there is to make it non-complex. I see Marco said that he will be adding more social proof. Let's see if anyone has any feedback or any changes that they made or they want to make to their modals. As I wait for that, I'm just going to quickly note that we're still moving on, but we're going to move on to SEO now. And there are a couple exercises in the distribution section that we didn't get to. So exercise 13, 14, and 15, where you dream up your lead magnet. And again, lead magnet in this book in DCR focuses mostly on written content, but you can also create lead magnets for podcasts, for YouTube, etc. How to do competitor research and how to come up with SMART goals. So it looks like David rewrote his, which does seem to be quite a bit shorter, which I think is great, which is get weekly briefings about how emerging technology is transforming your life from the director of technology at the MIT Museum. I think that's great. At least certainly an improvement from before. And I think there's some social proof baked in there, right? It's the director of technology at MIT Museum. Wow, that sounds like someone who knows what they're talking about. MC said, I'll add to mine, free and no spam, try for social proof. And it sounds like you'll be shortening it somehow. Okay, wonderful. So take all of these exercises, make sure you take them back and kind of work them more than the time we have allotted. And this is just a reminder from the distribution section that, again, one of the exercises, exercise 14, gets you to do a bunch of competitor research. That's also a great way to figure out what copy people are using, what advertisers they're working with, etc. And I went over this last time, but these are a bunch of different tools that you can use to get there. And then, of course, the one thing that a lot of people ask during distribution is always, well, one, they ask, okay, what channel should I focus on? I'm going to cover that because I think everyone should be focused on SEO, but also what are a bunch of quick wins? I'm not going to go over these, but just know that they're in the book and also in these slides. If you want just a bunch of quick wins, or basically a checklist to go through, you can go back to this. And again, it's in the book, of course, as well. Okay, we're going to talk about SEO, which you see this exclamation point because I love talking about this topic. I think it is a topic that whether or not you will pursue it on your own, it is an asset. It's something that in understanding SEO, you'll be able to use that data for more than just writing. It's about learning about what people care about, which I think is obviously such a broad topic that can apply anywhere. Okay, so we talked about codes. This is just a quick note about why SEO is great. We already did the exercise before, but you can see there's a lot of green here. And the only red across the codes framework is effort, which again, a lot of people stray away from. But if you're willing to put in the effort, you're gonna reap the best rewards of, personally, I think any channel through the dependability and scalability. And speaking just to the scale of it, this is the size of Google. It's pretty crazy. And you can see the Google adjacent sites. And of course, YouTube is owned by Google as well. So if you're talking about scale, this is pretty freaking huge, where it is by far the top website in terms of traffic. And just to give you a sense, every year there's trillions of searches. And trillion is like one of those numbers where we as humans can't really understand the scale of that. And in addition to the scale, we've got this dependability, right? So slow and steady wins the race. I always give this example, and even if you've heard it before, it's a good reminder every time. Even I tell people about it, I'm like, wow, I really need to remember how important this is. So basically, if you want a bunch of traffic to your site, there are many different ways you can go about it. And just to kind of compare different types of options, if you wanted 30,000 page views in a day, one option is you could hit Hacker News, the top of Hacker News every single day. That is impossible. No one's ever done that. And you would probably get banned if you tried. And so that is the equivalent of hitting the top of Hacker News, 30,000 page views. You could also go the paid route. And there's many other routes, but these are just examples. You could go the paid route where you go and buy Facebook ads. And let's say you're accounting for 10 cent clicks, which is very low, right? Most of the time clicks cost more than that. You'd still be spending over $1 million a year to generate that amount of traffic. The other option, which is the option I'm vouching for, is you could do that through SEO. And it's actually very achievable. And you can see a different matrix of how you could get there through, you could be 30 articles, and those 30 articles get 1,000 page views a day. I'd say that's actually the harder option, right? Because most of the time you're going to be tackling long tail keywords. Or you could write 300 articles and they each get 100 pages a day. And you're at that point. And of course, this does not happen overnight. We've already talked, it takes a lot of effort, but it's doable. And it's got this bedrock. And once you get there, you're there. Of course, algorithms changes can hit, but you're there. And you're not on that hamster wheel. A very, very quick example that I always like to give is NerdWallet. They are a top 3,000 website. They actually went public recently at several $billion. So I used to, this is an old slide, and they were $1 billion of websites. Well, now they're actually, $1 billion+ company as well. And they brought in at this time, and I believe it's even higher. I think it might even be like 30 million now. X number of page views, 20 million at this time. And you can see most of it was search. And they do have social channels, but they're actually not that big. Search brings them a majority of their traffic. And they're a perfect case study for what we'll go over in terms of SEO. But as a secondary case study, here are 4 different sites. Some of them you might even recognize. And again, this is old data. But basically, of these 4 sites, you can see the total visits in the upper right. And you can also see at this time when these pictures were captured, how their traffic changed over time. And hopefully this is an obvious answer based on everything I've said, but which of these do you think has the highest ratio of organic traffic? You can just post that in the chat if you have any thoughts. So Marco guessed bottom left. John is saying Patel. Exactly, Camille agrees. So yes, that is the answer. And this is just a super, super quick way of showing you that, this is not only the most traffic, but it's also the most dependable, right? The most consistent traffic. This is not to rag on any of these sites, but this sounds like an extreme thing to say, but you truly cannot get to, many, many millions of page views in a given month without a majority or a strong portion of that being from SEO. It is very, very difficult unless you're obviously like a large news organization. But if you're just someone like me or you need that bedrock if you want to get to anything truly sizable. Okay, so again, I mentioned this before. I'm not going to go through all the stuff on this slide, but if you're going to take anything away, the reason I love SEO so much and that I get so excited to talk about it is because I think SEO is basically like data-driven writing, right? And so what is SEO? It's search engine optimization. You're matching people's problems with solutions. But the amazing thing is, unlike many other channels that exist out there, you have all of the data, and therefore you know exactly what many billions of people in the world care about and how much they care about it. So basically, by learning about SEO, you are basically figuring out the problems that people have. That's such an amazing data set. And of course, you can ignore the black hat tactics because they exist. But if you can reframe it around what I just said, that's really important. And in addition to that, you have the answers to the test. So I mentioned this, you have the data set, which is so exciting because you not only know what problems exist, but you know exactly how many people have this problem by the number of queries per month. You know if it's increasing or decreasing over time because you can look at how that search volume changes over time. You know what type of solution they're looking for based on the intent, which we'll talk about. You know if they care about X, they probably care about Y based on secondary keywords. You also know what solutions exist based on what's ranking there and what Google's prioritizing, and you know the competitiveness of the solution. So just a vast amount of data that you have about what people care about and how they're being served is incredible. And so again, even if you don't write content, SEO is an amazing place where if you're starting a business to learn about whether people care about this thing that you're building a business around. So if SEO is done right, you understand the user's intent. We'll talk about that. You're leveraging the data that Google is sharing. So now you have data-backed writing, and you're optimizing your content so that you're using what Google's telling you people care about and using that in your content. So moving on, we're going to talk about query mapping. So if you listen to what I said so far, you know that every Google search is a query, right? A raw query that someone's saying to Google, and then they're going to get a solution. But before we even get to the solutions that Google provides, this sounds like a very simple exercise, but I think it's important. most of the time when you search something in Google, it is not some elaborate sentence that is very articulate and you're saying exactly what you want. Often it's something like black screen Mac, right? Which Google has gotten very, very good at interpreting to know actually what this person's asking is like, how do I fix my Mac? Or, hey, Google, I don't know why, but I woke up this morning and my Mac stopped working and it's this black screen and I don't know what to do, right? That's obviously like a very long paragraph, but what you're typing into Google is black screen Mac, right? And so what I want you to do, and you can pull this up in whatever browser you're in, but go to your search history and, you know, based on your last 6 searches that are like, that make any sense, go and write them down. And you can probably get through a couple of these in the next minute or two. And then write down the core problems. So the same way I said black screen Mac is really, how do I fix my Mac? Re-articulate your problem in the way that you would articulate it to a person or to yourself if you're trying to communicate this problem. So I'll go on mute for a minute or two and hopefully you guys can go through this exercise. All right, that was around 2 minutes. So hopefully that was just a super quick exercise to get you geared around this idea that, again, Google is really good at parsing things that maybe aren't super clear into things that are helpful for the user. And what you want to get good at is understanding, again, the intent of what someone is searching, because at the end of the day, every single thing that someone puts into Google is a problem, even if it's super micro, a problem that they're trying to get solved. And if you create content that solves it for them, you're going to get that traffic. And so, okay, moving on to how to do this well. If you Google search ranking factors or something like that, or Google algorithm, you're going to get to these pages that have a ton, sometimes hundreds of ranking factors like you can see here. I think this is really tough for people who don't understand SEO or just getting into it because they're like, what the hell, I have to worry about 200 things? Like, what do I do? And how can I get started? And basically at the end of the day, all you need to worry about are 3 things. And this will help you understand what Google is trying to achieve. And it's credibility, relevancy, and usability. So credibility means, well, actually, I'll give you the example of if someone is trying to find a good cocktail bar in New York, right? Google, the same way that it does it for content, will be doing the same thing based on people's reviews and other data points. And so for credibility, they might be looking at whether if someone else has recommended this place, so they might look at reviews. Relevancy, when someone searches it, well, they're going to look up any particular keywords that you included. So if you just looked up restaurant, that's not as helpful. But if you looked up Mexican restaurant, okay, now they're seeing relevancy to that particular modifier. And then usability is, for example, it doesn't matter if it sends you 20 restaurants if 19 of those are closed at that time. So usability is something that not just is like how nice is the UX on this page, but is it actually serving someone and getting to their goal, right? And so that's an example if you're trying to find like a wine bar or a restaurant in New York, but it does the same thing with all of the content that it's processing for you online. It's wondering, is this credible, right? Is this something that people generally recommend? Is it relevant to your query, right? That's really important, because if not, you know, they're just showing you great content that you're not looking for with your problem. And then is it usable? And so to get to or get past these 200 ranking factors that can be very, very overwhelming, we'll do a quick exercise, which is exercise 17, which basically what I've done is I've gone to some of these pages that show 200 ranking factors, and I have a bunch of them here. You don't need to go through all of them, but the idea of this this process is for you to actually think through, when Google says it cares about mobile friendliness, why does it care about that? Is it because it's signaling credibility? Is it signaling relevancy? Or is it signaling usability? The same thing with the anchor text of links pointing to the page, right? What is that signaling to Google? So what I want you to do is go through in the next 2 to 3 minutes and write these down, or at least think through them in your head if you don't want to write them down, and just go down the list. For each one, are they signaling credibility, relevancy, or usability, that CREW framework? So I'm going to go on mute for a second, and I'll give you around 2 minutes to think through this. All right, We're back, and I saw Linda had a question. So I know some of these, especially if you have never done SEO before, sound complex, and that's almost the point of trying to distill them into something a lot simpler, of just understanding that at the end of the day, Google is trying to understand credibility, relevancy, or usability to the problem and linking it to a solution. So query relevant entities, I think actually have to do with the intent of a query, which I'll get to in a second. But overall, if you don't understand any or all of these, it's okay. Some of them, hopefully you could get a sense of. So for example, mobile friendliness, that has to do with usability, right? So if you get to a page and it's not really working for you on your phone, well, that's not very usable. And at the end of the day, that is friction to someone getting to the solution they're looking for. Something like quality of linking sites and pages, well, that relates to credibility, right? The more sites that are linking to you and the quality of those sites determined by their domain authority indicate to Google that you are credible based on the credibility of these other things, right? So you can kind of, again, go down this list, and a lot of these exercises I encourage you to spend more time on than this. And yes, I will, send out the recording and the Google Slides after this, and I can actually, at the very end of this call, I'll send you the link. Just, I don't want to exit out of the slides right now. Actually, let me just, since you're saying it's hard to exit out of this, I'll just share the slides right now. Although these are images, so it's a little, you can't really write over it very easily. But I will say that if you go to your, as I mentioned, your Gumroad library, that is a PDF which you can actually write in. As I said, these are images that are taken from that set. Okay. And I see MC was saying that doing the exercise, I think I've been overly weighting usability. Most seem to be credibility. Now, what's important here is that, I'll talk about this throughout, but all of these matter. And so you might think that one matters more than the other. And to an extent, certain things do matter, right? When you go to these sites, if I just go back to the original page where you can see some of these ranking factors, at least according to these third parties, these are not reported on by Google. They say that something like time on site matters more than the keyword in your title or your meta description. So there are sites that try to ascertain what's most important, but what you will see is that they all matter, and to the extent that if you have terrible usability, but great credibility and relevancy, well, you're not going to do that well. And same goes for if you have terrible credibility, but you have relevancy and usability, well, you're also not going to do that well. So they all matter. They do somewhat matter to differing extents, but I'm going to tell you about the few things that matter the most. I'm going to tell you at the end of this has kind of like the quick 80-20. So I know we're going over. If anyone needs to drop, this is going to be recorded. There aren't too many. There's quite a few more slides, but they're very, very quick. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is search intent, which relates to relevancy, as you saw in the last slide. So relevancy is all about what is this query actually trying to solve, and how relevant are these solutions that are being solved or being proposed for it, right? So how relevant is your article to the queries that you're trying to rank for? So this is an example of search intent. So if someone searches Apple, the question becomes, at least from Google's perspective, they're trying to figure out what the hell this person is looking for. Are they looking for a picture of an apple, the definition, to translate to another language, the company's stock ticker, the company's website? And you can see many other things here. So any guesses, if you were Google, right, and you didn't have, because we're people, we didn't have all the data that we have now, what would you think this person is looking for? You can just post in the chat what someone searching Apple would be looking for. Ivy's saying maybe where to buy apples near me. John is saying the computer. So the reason I'm showing this is because when Google sees a new query, a completely new query, it's doing exactly what we're doing today. It is guessing. But over time, Google compiles, as I said, trillions of searches every single year. And for any given search, depends on how much people search it. But in this case, the search volume for this, at least at the time of searching or of making these slides, was 120 million per month. So Google has 120 million data points per month. And what it does is it uses previous data, but it also uses new data to see how people interact, right? So when someone searches Apple, what links are they clicking? How much time are they spending on those pages? So that's why usability does matter, and we'll get into that in a second. A lot of people are saying the computer. And so the best way the easiest way for you to learn what people are looking for, especially, I should say, on queries where Google does have data, because again, if it doesn't, it's trying things new, it's testing things all the time, is just to go to the SERP, the search engine result page, and to see what is ranking there. Google is telling you what they're looking for by showing what is ranking at the top. So in this case, the answer is a little ambiguous. We're going to talk about different types of intent in the sense that if you go to this page, there are several different types of results. So there's some results. The top one is Apple's website, which tells you most people who are searching the term Apple are trying to get to Apple's website. But there's also some things like there's news on the company, there's information about the company, so there's the company Wikipedia page. And so this one's a little ambiguous in the sense that what you'll see with some results pages is all of the results are basically the same kind of thing, right? In this case, there's some navigational queries, which we'll get into in a second, the type of query, versus there's some informational queries or results, I should say. But the point here, if you take anything away from the slide, it is you can learn what people are looking for just by simply going to the results page and seeing what is ranking there, because that is Google telling you, I've tested this so many times. Even if you thought it was people trying to buy apples, I see their behavior. I see what they click on. I see what they really were trying to do. And that is why I'm ranking the best thing for them. So that brings me to intent. So intent has 4 different types. It really used to have 3, and then they broke out commercial from transactional. But basically, there are several different types of intent. Informational is highlighted here because if you're creating content, the way that we are creating content, you only want to rank for informational terms. This is so key. This is across all of the things people do wrong on SEO. It is this. They try to rank on terms that are not informational with informational content, and that will never happen. So Google literally buckets these into different types of intent. Every query has an intent associated. As I mentioned, they can sometimes be ambiguous. Ambiguous meaning there are several different types of intent on the page because there are several different problems people are trying to solve with that query. But informational basically means I want to know X. So when I'm searching for this, I want to know more about something. Navigational is I want to go somewhere. So I'm trying to get to the Apple website. That's navigational. Transactional means I want to do something. So for example, maybe I want to buy Bitcoin. That is trying to do something, transact. Commercial, it can be a little confusing again between transactional and commercial, is I want to buy, but the difference is transactional means like I want to do something now. Commercial means I want to buy something, but it may be at different points in the journey. So I may be comparing iPhone 10 versus iPhone 12. That is a commercial query. And so it's really, really important for you to know the different types of intent classification. But what's the most important is that you only target informational queries with your content. So these are a bunch of examples that I will not go through, but you can kind of just look, scan over, or refer back to these. But again, there are different types of examples of different queries, different intent classification, and really what that person's trying to achieve. And the one thing I will call out here is that any sort of informational query, for the most part, I'd say 90+% of the time, you can reframe into like a who, what, when, where, why question, right? And so for example, if I'm searching red wine stain, really what I'm saying to Google is again, hey Google, I got too drunk and I was sitting there and I accidentally knocked my wine off the table and now it's in the carpet. I've never done this before. Please help me out, right? And so really it's a question, how do I remove this wine stain, right? Similarly, if I'm searching for like garlic green beans, I'm not searching to buy garlic green beans. I'm searching to learn, hey Google, how do I make garlic green beans, right? And so you typically, if you're unsure, can restructure an informational query into something that is a little more like a question. Some of the other ones, you'll have a harder time doing that. And again, you can see different types of queries. And then there's the ambiguous ones where if you go to the SERP, you'll see multiple types of results. So for example, indoor plants, you'll see both things that show that people are looking to buy indoor plants immediately. So there will be almost like a commercial section. But then there'll also be articles that say, hey, this is how you take care of indoor plants, or these are the best indoor plants. And so with this said, oh, actually, I think we're going to move on to the exercise in just one second. This is just kind of showing what I just meant about ambiguous intent. This is an example of a SERP where if you look up remote work, or at least back when I took this, you saw multiple different types of results on that page. You saw transactional results, so you saw job boards, but you also saw articles. Then you also saw navigational, which means like I'm trying to get to a specific site. And by the way, up here on the in this corner, something I want to call out is if you look this stuff in Ahrefs and other sites, but specifically this is from Ahrefs, you can see how much conviction Google has. This is actually important, so I'm glad I didn't gloss over this, but you can see how much conviction Google has about their assertion of what kind of query this is. Because if for the last several years, the things ranking at the top of that SERP never change and they all tend to be the same kind of result, Google is sure of what someone is looking for. But if you see a lot of movement and you see a lot of changes there, and especially if you see changes in the type of query, that means that Google is still really trying to figure out what the hell people are trying to get to with their queries. So the idea here is listen to Google, pay attention to the SERP. If you're unsure, you go to the SERP and you look at what's ranking there. And Google will give you clues too, where for example, if you see like purchasable products, that probably means that it's transactional. If you see this people also ask, which is a set of questions, remember I said informational can be turned into questions, that likely means it's informational. So this isn't always true, but Google generally will tell you what it's looking for. Another example, or these are two examples where you actually can just look at the SERP and you can see, for example, informational, you see the people ask question here. You see this section at the top, which is like a long paragraph, an article style thing that they're featuring in the featured snippets, probably informational. Navigational, this is an example where if I were to tell you principled design is a query, you would probably think this is informational. Oh, people want to know how to do principled design. In this case, we learned it's navigational by going to the SERP and seeing that actually people are trying to get to this website. So it's important to look at the website as well, or to look at the SERP to learn, because sometimes it's small changes. In this case, remote jobs is a transactional query, remote OK is a navigational query, and remote work tips is an informational query. And the only way you can really find this out is by looking at the page. Okay, so that brings me to this next exercise, which is search intent. This will be a quick one, but I want you basically, we already did an exercise where you took your queries from your search history. And if you don't have those, you can use these ones. These ones here, Peanut, Terracotta Warriors, Moleskin Notebooks, Zoom Keeps Freezing, TransferWise Legit, and Art School. And I want you to take a couple minutes and guess the intent. And again, if you're unsure and you're trying to guess the intent, go and search this and see what ranks there. And we'll come back in 2 minutes and talk about the intent of these queries. If it's informational, as a reminder, navigational, transactional, or commercial. All right, I know we're over time, so I'm gonna, you can hear my alarm go off there. That was 2 minutes. I also want to answer some of the questions in here. So David is asking, when I'm looking at a SERP, how much of it is personalized to me versus the general visitor? It is personalized to you in a sense of, well, as I mentioned, without getting into the depths of the ranking factors, there are many ranking factors. Location is one of them. Previous search history is one of them. So there are things that impact you based on where you are. Certain queries are impacted more. So for example, if you were looking up dentist near me, or even if you're just looking up good dentist, Google has recognized that that is a location-based query, and therefore your location matters more than, let's say, red wine stained carpet, right? And so that does matter. And in addition to that, Google is using your search history as well. So if there's certain things that you've searched a lot of, Google, for example, let's say if you were searching one of those ambiguous queries, let's say you were searching Apple, and you were one of those people who actually was looking for apples to buy, not Apple the company, and you kept doing that, and Google saw that you were going to Apple, not apple.com, or you're going to some like Whole Foods or something, it would start ranking that higher for you. But generally, Google is showing, mostly the same things. If it's not a location specific query or something that you haven't shown them is otherwise what you're looking for. So you can, if you want, look at searches through incognito mode. But again, even if you look up a search in incognito mode, it'll differ from someone, let's say in India, because they aren't necessarily searching in incognito mode, and their location-based and individual-based data is factoring in. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I would, if you want to use incognito, fine, you don't need to. So Marco's saying, what if we have an existing YouTube channel? Can we use search terms from analytics to figure out what people are looking for more of? Yes, 100%. And this is exactly what great YouTube channels do. And so I think a lot of people believe that as a creator, they need to focus only on their creativity, and that's fine. I don't want you guys to go and just be only search first and therefore like ruin any sort of creative journey that you're on. But what a lot of YouTubers do is exactly this. They go and they dig into the data the same way that we're digging into SEO data or Google data. And what we're doing is we're finding out what people care about. And then within that data mining, hopefully some of the results were like, oh, I actually already wrote about this, or I really have wanted to write about this. And so it's just using data to augment our creative process. And you should be doing that with YouTube. That's what a lot of YouTubers do. They'll go and look at what's trending, or there's a lot of other data on YouTube that you can use. For example, like related channels, and you can look at their data, what videos they're creating, and likely try to be in the suggested page for them. But yes, you should be using data on YouTube the same way that you're using data on Google. John is asking, if I'm trying to drive traffic for newsletter conversions, should I be going for informational results? So this is always if I understand your question correctly, this is kind of a two-parted answer in the sense that newsletters are something that, yes, you want to grow, but generally if you're addressing newsletter content to the reader and it's something like your like Monday Musings, like that's David Perel's newsletter, and it's all about a bunch of different things, no one's searching for that. Right? So it's not, there's nothing wrong with it, but like you're never going to rank your newsletter. And so what you want to do is you want to take parts of your newsletter that could rank for queries. So for, let's say within your newsletter, you're talking about like this is just an example, but like the best tech inventions in the last decade, right? Maybe within your longer newsletter, you wrote about that. You want to tease that out. You want to put it on a blog, because another part of newsletters is that it's that owned relationship. But most of the time, like you can't rank something that you're sending to someone's inbox. You need to put it on a site. This is probably obvious and most people do this, but you want to take your content and chop it up in ways that you're trying to rank specific things for specific queries. Because again, no one is searching for your Monday Musings newsletter. Maybe now that he has got a big newsletter, they are, but they're not looking for the content that's wrapped inside this long newsletter. So you need to tease that out, and then you need to optimize those specific pieces of content to actually get traffic for them. MC is asking if one gets no images of snakes in incognito mode. I think that's a joke. I'm not sure. Oh, sorry. It was responding to Jesper's question. But anyway, let's quickly go through one or two of these. I just wanted to show you guys, if you haven't already looked some of these up, where some of them aren't super clear. So Art School, for example, maybe you already knew this, but Art School, it's spelt funny for a reason, where it's not, someone's not looking up you know, to learn about art school, they're trying to get to a specific page. They're trying to find something called art school. So that is a navigational query. Something like a Moleskine notebook. You may think, oh, I want to learn about Moleskine. If I remember correctly, where again, what I would do in most cases is I would pull this up in my browser and I would look. And from what I remember, what you see when you search Moleskine notebook is not about Moleskine. It is someone trying to buy a Moleskine notebook. So in that case, because they're trying to buy it in that moment and not consider their purchase journey, it's probably a transactional query. Something like Peanut, they just want to know what the hell a peanut is, if I remember correctly. And so that would be an informational query. And so these are just examples, but really, if you take anything away from SEO, most people get intent wrong, and that is so important. So I just said, let's go through these together, but we already did that. Let's keep moving. Quick thing to note is that generally, if you are trying to target a particular page, if it has the same amount of search volume, again, all of these factors are part of this like mass calculus, but if you're trying to say all things being equal, if you're looking for a particular type of query, generally you want to stay away from ambiguous queries. Why? Because as I said, ambiguous means Google in some way often is still trying to figure out what the hell someone's looking for, or that some fraction, let's say it's like 30% are looking for X, another 20 are looking for Y, and another 50 are looking for Z. You just get less market share in that case. And so what you want to generally look for is, for example, these two queries are roughly equal in terms of search volume. I would much rather go for the purely informational query than the mixed ambiguous query. The other thing is, I'm not going to go through this in depth, but another thing that a lot of people get wrong is they think that they should rank for or try to rank a particular article for many different things. So this is the same kind of example that I gave with the newsletters. It's like you may write about 5 different things within that newsletter. 5 of those things people are searching for, but they're not searching for them together, and you're not trying to rank all of them because you will not rank for all of them. So you want to rank any particular piece of content for one primary keyword. You're optimizing that entire article for the one thing, the one problem that people are looking for, that they're trying to get to, or that you're trying to solve with this article. So you can see sometimes there's many keywords that are potential. So for example, indoor plants, if you're creating an indoor plant guide, there are probably several, there's 4 here, but there are probably dozens of potential keywords that you could optimize it for. Choose one. Do not choose several to try to rank for. Optimize it for one. And then you can have secondary keywords within the article that help augment it, but you're still optimizing the article for one single thing. The other quick thing I'll note is what I said before. SEO is such an amazing tool to help you understand what people are looking for. So it's not just to get you more traffic, but if you're creating a guide like this, you should do other keyword research to see what the secondary keywords are, because that's telling you what types of things you should include in the article. So if you're creating an indoor plant guide, you can guess what people are looking for, or you can do secondary keyword research and see, oh, they're actually looking for like, beginner guide to growing plants indoors, or how to repot their plants, or how to take care of them in the winter, etc. You get the point. Use the data because it's there and it can make your content better. As I said, we're not going to get through all of the exercises, so want to call out that there are several more, 19, 20, and 21, which go through several other exercises that relate to SEO, which relate to building links and content competitors, and how to come up with kind of creative ways to create SEO-specific pieces or assets. I'm going to zip through the other 2 things because remember, we talked about credibility, relevancy, and usability. I've talked about relevancy, and that's the intent piece, making sure you're matching the query to what people are actually looking for. The other quick things are credibility and usability. And again, I'm going to zip through these, but basically credibility is Google understanding, are you credible? Is there a reason for me to trust you relative to all the other sites out there? And it justifies this mostly through domain authority or your backlink profile. And so just as a quick exercise, if you looked at these 2 sites, and I know this is a lot of data, but imagine these are the 2 queries, change is constant, WordPress tutorial for beginners. At the time of pulling this together, they had around 3,000 searches per month each, right? If you look at, imagine there's the top 4 results for each of these showed up, and these are the domain authority and the kind of URL authority for each one. Which one, I mean, I kind of gave you the answer on the slide, but which one would you rather rank on? Would you rather try to rank for change is constant, or would you rather try to rank for WordPress tutorial for beginners? You can just add it to the chat. Okay, so John got it. It is the changes constant one. So all things being equal, again, there's many things that go into the algorithm, but you can see here the backlink profile of the things ranking for WordPress tutorial for beginners is insane. Like this is like 300,000 backlinks is an absolutely wild number. So is 3,000 referring domains for a single page. And so the point here is, as I mentioned, there are many parts that go into the algorithm, but you want to pay attention to, if you're trying to rank for certain queries, there's a competitive nature to those queries in addition to the intent, and your domain authority and your individual link authority matters. This data is coming from Ahrefs. This data doesn't show up in Ahrefs in the same way. I had to look up each of these pages individually, but it's basically parsing that into the keyword difficulty that you see in Ahrefs. So basically, not all domains are equal. The basic idea here is these are several of the sites that I am related to, except Forbes, of course. And you can see this is old data, but my domain authority was 47 at the time, which is higher than Unoy's at 23, which is lower than The Hustle, which is lower than Forbes. So at least, all things being equal, if we all wrote the same article published on the same day with the same content, Forbes would outrank us, right? Forbes would outrank all of the other ones, again, with all things being equal. Okay, so what I want you to do really quickly is go to this link, and I'll actually, you can either go to ahrefs.com/backlink-checker, or you can just Google Ahrefs backlink checker. It's a great example, a very, very simple elementary example of a query, right? So if I was searching Ahrefs backlink checker, what kind of query is this? If anyone wants to guess in the chat as they're looking this up, if I was looking Ahrefs backlink checker, is it informational, navigational, transactional, or commercial in nature? Yes, Linda got it. It's navigational. I'm trying to get somewhere. I'm trying to get into a very, very specific and clear place, which is this link, this Ahrefs backlink checker, which actually does relate to some of the commentary in the chat, which is, yes, a lot of this data is from Ahrefs. Some of it, actually, none of this I think is, oh, actually, yes, the search volume, the little bar that said the amount of search volume per month, that is from Keywords Everywhere. But Ahrefs is expensive, but they do have some free tools that they released relatively recently in the last couple of months, including this backlink checker, which gets you part of the way. I know that a lot of other people will use things like SEMrush, or I'm trying to remember some of the other ones that are popular that are very cheap, but there are cheaper tools. And if you go to the resource directory, the Doing Content Right resource directory, there's a list of over 100 tools, not all SEO tools, but there are SEO tools there that you can explore, many of them which are cheaper than Ahrefs. So if you go here, I'd love to see for anyone who went to this backlink checker, and I can pull mine up just as we're going through this. I see it, I have it pulled up here, and I can show you if I pull up stephsmith.io and I can check my backlinks. Oh, I am not a robot. Okay, so now my domain authority is 56. I've got 5,400 backlinks, around 1,000 referring domains, and there are tons of other things that you can go through. We're not going to have time to go through an in-depth kind of Ahrefs walkthrough. That would take, over an hour on its own, but you can learn a lot more in the book about what to pay attention to here, how to look up content competitors, etc. But I'd love, just out of curiosity, if people wanted to share their domain authority in the chat. But generally, as you're exploring your domain authority, let me just pull this back up. You want to be reasonable with your targets. So this is obvious, but as I mentioned, if I'm writing the same article as Forbes, Forbes is going to outrank me. And so you want to build up your domain authority over time. Generally, at the beginning, you want to definitely make sure you're in the double digits, and even 15 is quite low, and you want to get it up into the 20s or 30s or 40s as soon as you can. That's still low when it comes to something like Forbes, or comparing it to that, because domain authority is logarithmic in nature, and so something that's an 80 is actually much, much, much better than something even at a 70. And so what you want to make sure is that when you're looking for keywords, especially if you have a low domain authority, that are in your range, right? As in your range of competitiveness. And so generally, this is a rule of thumb, you want to look for keywords that are around hundreds to low thousands. I always say somewhere between like 100 to around 5,000 max when you're first starting out. That is a rough guidelines. So keep that in mind. And the reason this is important, this is kind of like I mentioned, intent was the main thing people get wrong. I would say this is the second thing people get wrong, which is that they look at something and they say, well, this keyword stuff has 1 million searches per month. Well, 1 million searches per month is great for the things ranking there. But guess what? With your domain authority, you're going to rank on page 98 or something like that. Like you're not even going to be near the first page. And you can see here the click-through rate based on position. We all know this, but the first position gets the lion's share of clicks. Second, third, fourth get some. And then after that, it's, you know, you get basically none. So it doesn't matter. 0 times 1 million is still 0. So you want to go for keywords that are actually within your range of competitiveness. Now, hopefully you guys will take some time, it doesn't have to be right now, to look up your domain authority in that tool. But I just wanted to share quickly, we're not going to go through all of these, but in the book, there are 30 or so, and there are kind of a dozen or so shared here, ways that I encourage you to start building links, right? So it's not the most fun aspect of SEO. I think it's actually the least fun aspect of SEO. But if you want to, again, rank for things, you got to be credible, you got to be relevant, you got to be usable. And credibility relates to links. And so if you don't naturally build them on your own, as in if your content hasn't built those links yet, you can wait, but you can really, really accelerate your growth through SEO by building some links. And I would say the one I'll call out here, paying for links, I mentioned this in the book, but generally, if you don't know very much about SEO and you're not working with someone you trust, I would stay away from the paying for links and focus on all of these other ones are entirely organic, meaning they don't cost any money. Okay, the final thing very quickly is usability. So again, all of these three things matter. And the example for usability that I just super quickly go through is imagine you're searching for something. I always like to give these examples as if I am the person entering the query. So let's say I search for find AirPods. Okay, well, maybe this is a new query and Google doesn't know what to show me yet, right? So Google's learning. And first they show me a map of stores. But basically I look at the map of stores, it's the first thing ranking there, and I don't click. And if enough people don't click that thing, Google will realize, oh, actually it seems like whatever we tried there didn't work, right? So we're just gonna stop showing that. Then the second thing I see is an article titled how to find AirPods. And I go, okay, this is actually what I'm looking for, right? This is like relevant to my query. It probably had high credibility, so that's why Google showed it. And so I click it, and then I go through it, and I basically, it is an article that says like, hey, maybe you left it here, maybe you left it here, maybe you left it here. And I'm like, this is kind of what I'm looking for, but really what I'm looking for is like a tool to help me find these AirPods. So basically I scroll through it really quickly and then I bounce. So that is a user engagement metric that Google uses. And again, if enough people do that, or the lion's share of people do that, or even enough relative to other articles, it's going to start deprioritizing that, moving it down the rankings or removing it entirely. So I bounce and then I come back and then I see a page that says how to find lost AirPods and make them ring. Okay, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I basically go there, but the page takes 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, way too long to load. And I'm like, I know there are 7 other things on this SERP that'll help me because I know how efficient Google is. So I just bounce. So again, if enough people do that, Google deprioritizes it. And then finally, in rank number 4, I see how to find lost AirPods with Find My iPhone app. I'm like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. It loads immediately. I go there, I spend a couple minutes there, I solve my problem, I find my phone, and then I leave that page or I close it out. But the point is that I'm not then going and browsing and looking for like clicking more links in that SERP. I probably close my tab. And basically Google knows through that user engagement that I found what I was looking for. My problem was solved. And the reason I'm showing this is their usability matters. And in fact, a lot of people focus so much on credibility and relevancy, which are important, but it's because it's a little easier sometimes to almost hack credibility and relevancy. You can't hack user engagement. In fact, some agencies have tried to do that. And they literally hire people to like scroll through sites in ways to like pretend that people are engaging with them. But the point is Google really prioritizes usability because at the end of the day, that's what it's trying to do, is trying to get people to come back to Google. And so in this scenario, what will happen, you see these arrows on the left, the first 3, if enough people engage in that way, they'll rank down, 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 down. This one will rank up, right? And eventually, hopefully you'll get to a page where, and this often happens, think about the number of times you go to Google and you get exactly what you're looking for in the first go. And that's why Google is so much better than so many other search engines, because you'll go to other places and this is the type of experience you'll get on another search engine. And Google will do this enough. It has enough data where basically most of the time you get exactly what you're looking for. And so that was just like a quick overview on usability, just to remind you that it's not just, again, like the UX of your page. Usability is how quickly and efficiently and frictionless can someone get to the information that they're looking for. So overall, I know I've been talking about SEO for quite some time. We went through some exercises. This is the 80-20. The 80-20 is that, again, you want to remember CREW: credible, relevant, usable. Credible being high quality, relevant means to the user, is it relevant to their intent and what they're looking for, and usable means that searcher, do they get to what they're looking for? And you can very, very quickly get to be in a pretty good space here by first prioritizing, can I get to this double-digit DA if I'm not already there? So at least, again, double digits. Really, you want to get closer up to that 50 mark. It'll take time though, especially if you're starting. The relevancy 80-20 is just making sure that you're selecting keywords that have informational intent, and again, the right type of competitive nature, which means the hundreds to the 5,000 or so max when you're first starting out. Again, rough guidelines. Usability, the very, very quick thing where, again, you're just 80-20, make sure your site loads in 2 seconds or less, ideally 1 second or less, and make sure that it is mobile friendly, et cetera, et cetera. I break a lot of these rules. So if you go look at my site, I'm not doing perfect in a lot of these areas, but this is what you can do to basically get to that 80-20. There's a couple other notes here. These are almost like action items. So for example, just like check boxes as you can go through and make sure you're adhering to these like 80-20 SEO rules. And so finally, I know we went way over, we're 30 minutes over, so thank you to everyone who stuck around, but really the takeaway, and this is the takeaway for the SEO section, don't ignore the data. This data set is so incredible that Google gives you access to what billions of people do around the world every single day. And so you can go and try to write or podcast or create videos without this information, and you might do well, but you are kind of doing yourself a disservice by ignoring the problems and the solutions that Google is handing to you. And the other quick note you can see down here is the amazing part is that if you've already created content for a long time, you've probably already solved some of these problems and you just need to make minor relevancy changes or potentially credibility changes, increasing your DA in order for your stuff to start ranking, because Google is constantly recrawling and redetermining what should rank somewhere, retesting, as I mentioned before. So keep this in mind, don't ignore the data. And if you are like me, I think you might even start to love SEO if you approach it with that mindset where it's this asset that you can take advantage of. So finally, this is the homework. I showed you there were 6 or so exercises that we didn't get a chance to go through from this section. Take your time to go through those. Before next week, if you have time, read chapters 5. Oh, I say 5 and 5, let's say 5 and 6, monetization and the bonuses. And next week, we won't really go through any content. So I would recommend you go through these chapters or listen to the videos. We'll be doing kind of like a final end of week or end of session quiz, which I think will be a little more fun. And then you can add any extra questions to the bonus AMA that I've talked about before. So that's it. Thank you so much for those who stayed over time. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer them. If not, I hope you found this useful, and I'll just wait to see if there are any questions in the chat. If not, we can close this out. David's asking, why not Twitter threads? I think so I should say, when I say I don't like Twitter threads, I don't like most Twitter threads. Trung, for example, one of my coworkers, I think does amazing Twitter threads. And I guess what I would say is that Twitter actually had this amazing forcing function of saying, like, you have this number of characters, and the same way that people say, like, when you're writing, at first you write a lot, and then the best writers can condense it down to really just its essential parts. I think that's what Twitter did in a way, is it's forcing people to just get to the nitty gritty of things. And instead, what people have now done with Twitter threads is that they've made like what could be said in a tweet into 10 tweets. And I would say that also, I'm not sure why this mechanic exists, but I've actually said this on Twitter. I think most Twitter threads, not all, most Twitter threads are low quality blog posts. Like if they were a blog post, they no one would care about them, and in fact no one would read them because they would say this isn't saying anything. So again, not hating on anyone in particular. I think actually, again, just call it Trung, I think he has wonderful Twitter threads. I would say that I wouldn't put everyone else in the same bucket. So it's really just a commentary on like why use the extra space to say less. So yeah. Any other questions, thoughts? Anyone else love, hate Twitter threads? All right, doesn't seem like it. I'll wait just another 30 seconds because I know some people can take a second to type out questions. But if not, reminder, all of this content is in that resource directory. I'll send out a recording after the fact. Looks like there is one question coming through, or maybe two. So MC is asking, I focus on Bedrock at the cost of ignoring socials entirely, partly because I can't afford to specialize in too many types, but mostly because I don't like the black box of socials. This is something I should rethink. I think it depends. So, and I know it depends, like the worst way to start an answer. But if you have a personal following, as in like my brand is not like the female entrepreneur or something, it is Steph Smith. I think if you have a personal following, one, it's much easier to build your socials because people like following people, not companies. And you can benefit from, again, people like feeling this connection with you, which they may not feel from getting to you through a Google search. With that said, it's okay if you don't have socials. Whether you're a brand or otherwise, you can benefit from it. But actually, NerdWallet is the perfect example that I showed before, where their social followings were very small, at least considering their size, and they're doing just fine, right? So if you can build up a really, really solid organic strategy, you don't need social to an extent. And some people may disagree with me there, but it also depends on your goals, right? So if your goal is just to build a thriving business that gets a lot of page views and makes a lot of money, you don't need social. And I think if your goal though is to build up, again, like a personal following where people engage with you and you meet people and you like you have more of that kind of personal connection, then yes, maybe you should consider social. But I would say actually it's a fallacy that a lot of people think you need social. But really, I think it's that most people enjoy social more. So if you don't enjoy social and you're doing just fine with organic, I would challenge to say that you don't need to change that strategy, especially if your organic traffic is going well. Janat is asking, do you ever pivot your content? I find that I write about something and then I figure out I'm more interested in something else. So this is another example where there is kind of like the optimal strategy if you're just optimizing for growth, right, and speed of growth. And then there's the very like human side of things that doesn't always align perfectly with that optimal strategy. And so I would say that often if you are really just focused on like, again, growing as fast as you can and listening to like the best way to do that, you probably don't want to pivot as much, right? So that's why a lot of people say, especially early on, you don't want to pivot, right? So if you're the writing guy, people get to know you to be the writing guy. And at least in those early days of kind of building your audience, you can benefit from sticking to that. But kind of adding on this human element, if you're okay with maybe not growing as quickly and just maybe having a little more fun with it, which is the approach I took, I took the approach that you're saying, where I wrote initially about remote work, but then I talked about like women in tech, and then I talked about like learning to code, and now I talk about content. And some portion of my audience has followed me along the way, but I'm sure I lost lots of people who were interested in X, and now I'm talking about Y. And so if you're okay with that, then you don't need to worry as much about pivoting. And then I would say the final layer to that is it depends also on your strategy for acquiring readers or listeners, whatever you're creating. So if you have more of a social-based strategy, that's when you struggle a little bit to pivot, right? Because people get to know you as like, Steph is the content girl, and therefore like that's what I expect from her. However, if you have a search-based or acquisition strategy, you can pivot a lot more without anyone knowing, because you have all of these independent users finding you through different terms that can be completely unrelated, but in their unique user experience, they searched for remote work and they're getting to me and they're reading the article about remote work. And then maybe in the suggested page, they see other articles about remote work. So they're getting a great experience. Similarly, person B searched for women in tech and they got to me through that. And they can be on my site and not really care that I have several interests. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically your acquisition strategy also has an influence on how much you can pivot. And at the end of the day, I'll come back to the point where you can always pivot, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just, I would say it's sometimes slightly at odds with the speed that you might want to grow. So there's always a balance between like doing the optimal thing and then doing what you enjoy. But I would generally say if you have the time, I tend to lean towards more do what you enjoy and write about the things you like, because at the end of the day, it's like you're probably going to create better content if you do that. All right. Let me see if I can see MC saying she's genuinely relieved. She's building a business brand, not a personal brand. And yeah, if the SEO game is working for you, maybe you'll be the next NerdWallet. And all those people who are building up Twitter followings will probably be very jealous because their Twitter followings are a lot harder to monetize than a site that gets millions of page views every single month, right? And so don't feel the need to just build a social following just because everyone else is. Any other questions? I'll just wait 30 more seconds. I think I answered the questions so far in the chat, but I just noticed a question from Marco in the past or earlier in the chat, which is, what if we're starting over from a previous project? We have a successful website or YouTube channel. Can we create backlinks to our new website from the old platforms and build up our domain name? Yeah, that's, I mean, so if you remember in Ahrefs, there's backlinks and there's referring domains. They're two different but related things. So for example, I can have an article that links to another person's site, and I can link to them 6 times. But that's still that's one referring domain, 6 backlinks, right? 6 different links. Or actually, that wouldn't be even considered a 6 backlinks. I would have to be across 6 different articles, I should say. So the idea is that both backlinks and referring domains matter. Referring domains matter more. And so if you built up 1,000 links to your new site through your existing site, that's still only one referring domain. And so it's not going to get you that far in advancing your domain authority. That's why also if you look in Ahrefs, some sites will have these, their referring domains will be pretty steady, but their backlinks will be all over the place, because there are sites that index you and then index you across thousands of their pages, but that doesn't really do much for you, right? It's still one backlink. The other thing to just quickly keep in mind that I didn't mention before is if you're building links, it's in the book, but you want to make sure they're follow links, not no follow links, because no follow links are effectively saying, actually, hey, Google, I know this link is on my site, but I'm actually not lending my credibility here. So just so you know. And basically, to your point, yes, if you have any sites, and this is actually I think one of the suggestions in the book, if you spin up a new site and you have 6 other sites, find a way to link back to those sites to jumpstart your domain authority on that new site. But again, it will only get you so far unless you happen to be someone with like, you know, dozens of sites that you can direct those links to. But yes, it can help a lot, especially if you have any sites that do have a pretty high domain authority. That is helpful at the beginning. So yes, you can certainly do that. But again, unless you have a dozen or more of them, it's not really going to move the needle too much. So you are going to have to deploy other link building strategies. Yeah, you can definitely, just replying to your comment in the chat, you can definitely add a link to your new website from the old one. You definitely should do that, right? It's a simple thing, especially if it's pretty natural and they're not completely disjointed. But even, so you mentioned that your old website has a domain authority of 38. I should mention 38 is not bad. It's all like, it's, again, the domain authority scale is kind of logarithmic in nature. So anything over 70 is like amazing. Anything I'd say in the like 30 to 70 range is, or I should say 30 to 50 more so, is good. 50 to 70 is pretty good. And then anything under 30 is like where you're probably not going to rank very much. You still can rank on uncompetitive terms. And again, it's part of this larger calculus. So it's, I don't want to make sweeping statements, but Google generally, I'd say especially 10 and under, that's when they will rank you pretty much nowhere, because basically it's like a new restaurant coming online where it's like they're looking for reviews. They're looking to see if people think this is credible, and they're not going to take a shot if they don't know it at least has some data points. So the reason I bring this up is because if you have a domain authority of 38, that link is still worth something. It's not as much as a link from a site with 90 domain authority, but it's worth something. And if it's no sweat off your back, yeah, make that link so you can start sending Google those signals that, you know, this site has value. from your existing site. Any other questions in the chat, or if anyone wants to go off mute, that's welcome as well.
Thank you so much for answering my earlier question.
Sure.
I feel like, that was really helpful and great to know.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming and thanks for asking questions. I'm just scrolling up to see if I missed anything else.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So I have articles that rank for amongst hundreds of millions or sometimes a billion, and they're kind of in my sphere. But then I see that, so I do leadership and communication, and when I have people, and so I'll have an article like how to stop talking so much, and that's like got a billion results, and I'm always on the first page. And I have others that are like that, but it doesn't translate to a ton of traffic. And then I look at this Ahrefs rate, and it's like 18. So it seems, sort of paradoxical to me that it doesn't rank better than that.
So when you say it's on the first page, you're seeing it when you're searching for it, you're seeing it on the first page. Is that what you're?
Yes.
So this relates likely, I can, if you send me an email, I can help you look this up and record a Loom for you. But what likely is happening there is it's ranking higher for you because, again, there's these kind of localized, local to your personal search behavior. It's ranking your site higher because you've been to that site many times and you probably have searched this and you've probably clicked your particular page on that particular query. And so it's ranking it higher. If Ahrefs is a good indicator of on average, right? So again,
Gotcha.
If it's saying 18, on average, if 100 people search this, on average, they're going to see it at 18. Some of those 100 people may see it at rank number 3. Some people may see it at rank number 58. But on average, they're seeing it at 18. And this relates to what I said before, where even though you're like, oh, 18 is not so bad, and I'm not trying to make you feel bad about that ranking,
no,
but as I mentioned, 1 gets the lion's share, rank 2, rank 3 gets some, and then really after that, it's anything, especially off of, there's a huge drop off after page 1. And again, it's what's most important with SEO is just think about your own experience with this. When do you ever go to page 2? It's typically only, you can also relate this to the intent, right? So you're talking about an informational article or an informational query.
Right.
I actually haven't seen this data. I'd be interested to see it, but what I can bet is that the times when you go to page 2 are when it's more of a commercial query where you're trying to you're trying to compare things, right? Or it's more of hey, this versus that, or I'm trying to learn more about different mattresses, or more of a learning kind of behavior versus an informational type query. If someone's trying to learn how do I not talk so much, by the way, I think that's a great great topic to write about. They're likely only reading somewhere between 1 to 3 articles about that topic, right? And so that's probably why you're seeing very little actual traffic to that page.
I was thinking that. I mean, I actually do see a good amount of traffic. I was wondering about why it doesn't show up in the Ahrefs, but there's a box that comes up from Google that says your average ranking this week was, number 3 and that kind of stuff. Is that, again, just like what you're saying, it's geared to me only, or is it?
No, so that is, at the end of the day, something to keep in mind, and I'm glad you brought this up. Ahrefs and SEMrush, all of these other sites are third parties. Ahrefs actually is the best of the third parties because it actually has the second most web scrapers of any other company other than Google. Google's number 1, right? And so Google at the end of the day, if you're trying to rank for Google, any first party data, any primary data that you get from Google is correct. But sometimes Google won't give you that data. So yes, if you are the site owner and you go to this, I've done this also where it'll be your site is number 2 for this particular query. That is correct. And the other correct data point that you can always go to is Google Search Console. Have you looked there at all? Because in Google Search Console, you have to register your site for it. But let me send the link to it, and I can pull mine up. You want to register your site in Google. It doesn't cost anything, but you just want to make sure it's in there. And then in Google Search Console, I'll just pull it up. The types of things.
I think I just haven't actually looked at it recently. I think I might actually have the site on there. So
yeah, let me pull this up so I can show everyone really quick. So if I share this, So in Google Search Console, this is for my blog. You can see the number of clicks and all the other stuff, if there's crawl errors and things like that. But you can also look up a particular URL. So for example, if I look up my writing is thinking article, oops, I forget, I must have gotten the URL wrong, but what is it, right? Oh, it's right with confidence, that's why. Why is this not working? Inspect any URL. I guess I'm just not, sorry, I should probably be looking at the actual URL in it. I haven't done this in quite some time, as you can tell, but this should pop up. You can look up any particular URL, and then within that URL, as you can see, it seems to be pulling it up now. That's interesting. You can request indexing if it's not in Google. But also, I'm in the wrong spot right now, but I think it's in actually search results. If I go in here, that's why I was getting confused. You can filter by a particular page. So you can see the number of impressions, clicks, but this is what I wanted to show. So average position in this view is useless because this is across all of your articles, but you can, if I look in pages here.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, sorry, this is freezing for some reason. I want this to close. Huh. Oh, there we go. Wait. So when this loads, I'm on my slower computer right now, but if you go to pages, you can filter by a particular page. And then once you're in there and you're just looking at one page, what you can see is the specific average position of that page over time. And so with your article, you might see like that maybe for a long time it was at position 8 and then it went to position 3. And then again, this is average. Let me just re-enter this. So it'll hopefully reload. But yeah, that's where you can see. And again, anything like Ahrefs is nice for any third-party data. And it can be also useful for your data because Ahrefs will also give you some of this data by country and things like that. I don't know why this is not working, but anyway, you can see where you could look. And you can also look at particular queries and also how your impressions or clicks are changing over time. You can look at the like whether web or mobile. But anyway, you should look there if you're curious about any, again, primary data from Google, because Google at the end of the day is the one who is collecting this data. And so that's going to be the most accurate of any of the
That's awesome.
sources.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. That's great.
Sure. Yeah, and MC saying you can also, there's so many things in Google Search Console. If people are not familiar with it, it is a goldmine of data. You can look for AMP error alerts. You can look for, like Google Discover is also a thing where sometimes your articles can be featured there. It's harder to game that in the sense that most people aren't sure how to actually get that to show up or how to like optimize articles for that purpose. You can, of course, like, as I showed you accidentally there, you can inspect a URL and make sure it's indexed. And if it's not indexed, you want to make sure that you're requesting it to be crawled. If you've changed an article, so for example, if you've re-optimized something for a new keyword and you want to make sure that it's indexed as soon as possible, that's when you would manually index it there. So Google's always recrawling sites, some sites more often than others. Often a higher domain authority site would get crawled more often than a low domain authority site. But if you want to ensure that the new version of your article is indexed by Google immediately, that's when you do what I showed you there and then ask for it to be re-indexed. And yeah, okay, I think that's mostly it. Hopefully that answered everyone's questions. Thanks to the 20 or so of you that stayed on for 2 hours. That's insane. Like I said, next week, I think there'll be slides in order to do the quiz. That's where how the quiz will be facilitated, but we won't go through any content. So make sure that if you missed anything, go back to the book or the previous live session. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining and hope this was helpful. See you next week. Bye.